If it weren't for him, I would not be sitting here telling this story. Joe Ronnie Hooper was not just another soldier, not just another man in uniform. He was the one who pulled me back when I had already stepped with one foot through the door of hell. Yes, I am one of those who were saved by him on the battlefields of the Vietnam War. I remember it as clearly as if it had happened last night, though decades have passed. Some memories fade with age, others soften around the edges, but this one remains sharp, piercing, and unrelenting. When I close my eyes, I still see the smoke, I still hear the gunfire, and I still feel the heat of death brushing against my skin. But above all, I see him, Joe Hooper, charging forward, fearless, while the rest of us clung to the ground praying to God for another breath. I've lived long enough now to know that time can heal some wounds. A broken arm, a bullet graze, even the aches that creep into your bones when you grow old. But time does not heal the memory of the moment you thought your life was over. Time does not erase the face of the man who made sure it wasn't. That night, as I sat alone with a glass of bourbon, I thought again about how different my life would have been if not for him. No wife, no children, no grandchildren climbing onto my lap asking for stories. No quiet mornings on the porch. No old age at all. The line between life and death is thin, and for me it was measured by the strength of his bloodied hands pulling me out of the dirt. The truth is, I didn't know him well before that day. He was my comrade, yes, but we weren't drinking buddies, we didn't swap letters from home. He was just another face in the unit, until the bullets started flying and all hell broke loose. That's when men show who they really are. And what I saw in Joe Ronnie Hooper that day wasn't just bravery. It was something more. Something I still struggle to put into words. He fought like a man possessed. He moved like death itself had no claim on him. I saw him take wounds that would have sent others crawling into the mud, yet he kept going as if his body was just a vessel and his spirit was made of iron. And when my blood was soaking the earth, when the screams of my brothers were swallowed by the chaos, Joe came for me. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because that was who he was. I've carried that with me for over 50 years. And tonight, as I tell you this story, I am not here to speak of medals or titles or honors carved in stone. I am here to speak of the man I saw with my own eyes, the man who reached into the fire and pulled me back. So when I say, if it weren't for him, I would not be sitting here to tell this story, understand this. I mean every word. Joe Ronnie Hooper was not just a hero to history. He was my hero. And this is the story of the day he saved my life. The memory of that morning has lived inside me for more than half a century, and yet it still feels like yesterday. We had been moving cautiously through the city streets, the kind that seemed frozen between the beauty of old temples and the violence of war. The Tet Offensive had turned Hue into a battlefield, and nothing about it felt like the Vietnam I had seen before. The air was heavy with smoke and dust, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the ruins like thunder rolling across broken skies. Our unit had been told the sector ahead was lightly defended. That phrase echoed in my head with bitter irony because in Vietnam those two words could mean anything, or nothing at all. I remember gripping my rifle tighter than ever, my palms damp with sweat despite the morning chill. We walked in a single file, nerves stretched thin, our eyes darting to every window, every alley, every shadow. The silence was heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to step into its trap. And then it happened. The street erupted in gunfire so sudden, so violent, that for a moment my mind refused to accept it as real. Bullets tore through walls and pavement, chipping stone, sending sparks into the air. Mortar rounds slammed into the ground, tossing dirt and debris skyward, filling our mouths and lungs with grit. Men shouted, some dropped instantly, their cries drowned out by the metallic roar of automatic fire. The air turned thick with smoke and blood. I hit the ground before I could even think, my cheek pressed against the cold dirt of the street. My heart pounded so hard that I could barely hear anything else, just the rush of blood in my ears. I clawed for cover, pressing myself into the earth, trying to make my body as small as possible, as though I could vanish if I wished hard enough. Around me, my brothers scrambled, some firing blindly, others frozen in fear. The screams of the wounded cut through everything, the sound that haunts me even now. I turned my head just in time to see one of our youngest men, a kid no older than 19, take a round straight to the chest. His body jerked backward and he fell hard, his rifle clattering to the ground beside him. Only minutes earlier, he had been laughing, teasing me about how I chewed the same piece of gum for hours to calm my nerves. And then just like that, he was gone. The look in his eyes as the life drained out of them was something I'll never forget. That was when I realized we were in the middle of a well-laid ambush. They had us pinned from every direction. Rooftops, windows, bunkers hidden behind broken walls. It felt like the city itself had turned against us, spitting fire from every crack and corner. Every instinct in my body screamed that I would not survive the hour. And yet, in that storm of terror, there was one voice that cut through the chaos like a blade slicing fog. Joe Ronnie Hooper. While the rest of us hugged the dirt, praying for the storm to pass, he rose to his feet, his figure sharp against the smoke-filled air. He shouted commands, his tone steady and fierce, as if the bullets meant nothing, as if fear had no claim on him. Keep moving forward. Don't stop. Push through. His words struck me like lightning. In the chaos of that ambush, when I was certain death had already reached for me, Joe stood tall, a force of will that refused to bend. While my body trembled with fear, his seemed carved out of iron. He wasn't just surviving that moment, he was shaping it. And as I watched him, I knew one truth: without that man, none of us had a chance. The enemy's fire grew heavier with each passing moment. It came from everywhere: rooftops, broken windows, crumbling walls that had been turned into bunkers. Every corner spat fire, every shadow seemed alive with muzzle flashes. The air itself screamed with the rattle of automatic weapons, the thud of mortars, and the sharp crack of rifles. We were drowning in it. For every shot we managed to send back, 5 or 6 came screaming toward us. It was as if the city itself had become a weapon against us. Pinned down, we clutched our rifles, our bodies pressed into the earth, praying for some kind of miracle. My knuckles were white as I gripped the stock of my weapon, but my arms trembled with fear more than with exertion. My mouth was so dry I could barely swallow, but sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. I remember thinking, this is it, this is how I die. A corporal shouted that we needed to fall back, but even he knew what that meant. In streets like those, pulling back wasn't an escape, it was suicide. The Viet Cong had us locked in a kill zone, and turning around would only expose our backs to the storm. We were trapped and every man knew it. The only question was how long we would last. And then Hooper moved. I can still see it in my mind. Him rising higher than the rest of us, his silhouette framed against the haze of smoke and fire. He didn't crawl. He didn't cower. He stood, exposed, a target for every gun in range. But his presence was electric. He raised his rifle, fired a burst, and then pointed with the barrel. There. That window, suppress it. You cover that bunker. Keep moving, damn it, keep moving. His voice cut through the chaos like thunder. It was madness, and yet it worked. Where fear had paralyzed us, his defiance jolted us awake. Men who had been frozen in place suddenly shifted, obeying his commands. They weren't just following orders, they were following him. Hooper's courage was reckless, maybe even insane, but it carried something we all needed in that moment: belief. If he could stand in the middle of hell and fight, then maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. I dragged myself forward, scraping against the ground, dirt and blood mixing under my hands. Around me the wounded cried out, their voices tearing into my soul. I didn't know who was alive and who was gone. But above it all, I kept hearing Joe, calm in the storm, steady in the chaos. At one point, I looked up and saw him reloading, his movements sharp and precise as though he had all the time in the world. Bullets cracked the walls around him, showering him with fragments, but he didn't flinch. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle, raised it and fired again, each shot deliberate, each burst pushing us forward. And then came the moment that burned itself deepest into my memory. Joe broke cover. With no hesitation, he sprinted across the open street, straight into the teeth of enemy fire. My heart seized. I thought I was watching a man sign his own death warrant. But he moved with terrifying speed, low and fast, weaving between bursts of fire. In his hands were grenades, and with ruthless precision, he hurled them into the enemy's nests. Explosions ripped through the windows, and for the first time the enemy fire faltered. That was Hooper, never asking others to do what he wouldn't. Where most men would cling to safety, he charged straight into danger, as if daring death itself to try and take him. And as we saw him tear into those positions, something shifted in us. Fear loosened its grip. For the first time in that ambush, we weren't just fighting to survive, we were fighting to follow him. The tide did not turn instantly. Even with Hooper tearing through their defenses, the enemy fought back with ferocity. More gunfire erupted from the far end of the street, and mortars continued to rain down, shaking the ground beneath us. Yet for the first time since the ambush began, there was movement in our unit. We were no longer frozen in fear. We were advancing, step by bloody step, behind the shadow of Joe Ronnie Hooper. I remember crawling forward, my body pressed flat against the earth, while glancing up to see him leading the way. He wasn't simply shouting orders anymore, he was showing us how to fight. Each time he destroyed a bunker, each time he cleared a window, it felt like he was carving a path through hell itself. And we followed that path because it was the only way out. At one point, I watched him drag a wounded man out of the line of fire, his own uniform already soaked in blood from his earlier wounds. Most of us would have stopped then, sought shelter, begged for a medic. Not Joe. He shoved the wounded soldier towards safety and then turned back into the fight without a pause. It was as though his pain only fueled him, as though the worse it got, the stronger he became. The street became a blur of smoke, fire, and screaming. I kept my head low, firing when I could, reloading with trembling hands and forcing myself forward inch by inch. Around me, men shouted to one another, trying to regain some kind of formation. We were battered, bleeding, and terrified, but we were no longer lost. Hooper gave us that. He gave us direction in the middle of the storm. Then came a moment I will never forget. A machine gun opened up from the corner of a building, cutting down 2 of our men before we even realized what had happened. The fire pinned us down completely, shredding walls and spraying dust and brick into the air. We couldn't move an inch without being torn apart. For a few seconds, it felt like the battle was slipping away again, that death had tightened its grip around us. But not for Joe. Before anyone could stop him, he bolted across open ground toward that position. Every instinct in me screamed for him to stay down, but he didn't hesitate. Bullets whipped past him, cracking the air, kicking up dirt at his feet. He didn't care. He moved with a determination that defied reason, a man possessed by something greater than himself. With grenade in hand, he charged the corner. The blast silenced the machine gun, and with it, the terror that had paralyzed us. Smoke and debris filled the air, and then Joe's voice came again, strong and commanding, "Move! Get up! Push forward!" And we did. God help me, we did. We surged forward behind him, fear replaced by a strange kind of fury, a will to live that we hadn't felt minutes before. It was contagious, his defiance, his refusal to die. We weren't just soldiers anymore, we were men bound together by the example of one. As I look back now, I know that many of us would not have survived had he not been there that day. The ambush was meant to wipe us out, to crush us in one violent sweep. But because of Joe Ronnie Hooper, because of his will, his ferocity, and his unbreakable courage, we pushed through. We lived. And I am here all these years later to tell you about it. We thought the worst was behind us, but the truth is that the battle was only just beginning. What we had faced so far was only the opening act of hell. The deeper we pushed into that sector of hue, the more the enemy bared its teeth. The first wave had left us shaken, but we still had enough strength to keep moving. The streets narrowed, the ruins closed in around us, and every step felt like walking into a trap. And then it came, the roar of AK fire from hidden corners, the thunderous whoosh of B-40 rockets streaking through the air, and the relentless pounding of mortars falling around us like angry gods hurling down their judgment. I remember the first rocket slamming into a wall just yards from me. The explosion sent chunks of concrete and steel flying like shrapnel, tearing into the men beside me. One moment they were there, shouting, alive, and the next they were sprawled in the dirt, broken, their blood splattering the walls. The blast threw me off my feet, my ears ringing so loud that for a moment the world went silent. And then, like a wave crashing back, the sound returned. Screams, gunfire, explosions. The noise was overwhelming, a storm that battered not just the body but the soul. Men fell all around me. Some were cut down mid-step, their bodies jerking violently before hitting the ground. Others screamed for medics who would never reach them. I can still see one man, his leg torn apart, trying to crawl forward with his arms, dragging himself through the mud as if sheer will could keep him alive. His cries still echo in my head. We were in the middle of a slaughter, and the enemy showed no mercy. Every window, every rooftop, every hidden trench seemed to spit fire. It was as if the city itself was alive, determined to crush us. I tried to keep firing, to keep moving, but my hands shook so badly that I could hardly aim. The fear was unlike anything I had ever known, not just fear of dying, but fear of vanishing, of being erased in that chaos with no one to even remember I was there. Then it happened. I felt a sharp, burning pain tear through my side. For a moment, I didn't even realize I'd been hit. I stumbled, my rifle slipping from my hands, my knees buckling beneath me. I fell hard onto the street, my face smashing into the dirt. The taste of blood filled my mouth, coppery and thick. I gasped for air, each breath shallow and ragged, my chest heavy as if the weight of the whole battle pressed down on me. Around me the fight raged on, but it was fading, muffled like I was sinking underwater. My vision blurred, the edges darkening. The only thing I could see clearly was the sky above, a pale, smoky gray that seemed impossibly far away. I thought, this is it. This is where it ends. I tried to move, tried to crawl, but my body wouldn't answer. My legs felt like stone, my arms too heavy to lift. I could hear men screaming, gunfire cracking, the thud of explosions, but it was all drifting away. A strange calm crept in, the kind that comes when you're too weak to fight anymore. I thought about home, about my mother's face, about the life I would never see again. And then the fear came crashing back. The fear of dying there, in that ruined street, forgotten, another body left behind in the mud of Vietnam. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mouth opened, blood spilling from my lips, but nothing else. My vision tunneled until all I could see was a blur of movement, shadows crossing in front of me, shapes I couldn't recognize. I thought death had come for me. But what I didn't know then was that Joe Ronnie Hooper was already moving, already cutting through the storm, already coming for me. I lay there bleeding into the dirt, every breath a battle of its own, convinced that I was already half gone. My hands were weak, my vision blurred, and the battle around me was slipping further and further away. And then, through the haze, I heard it, the same voice that had cut through the storm before. Joe Ronnie Hooper. I couldn't lift my head, but I felt his presence before I saw him. There was a strange calm in knowing he was near, even as the world collapsed around us. I heard his boots pounding against the pavement, the sharp crack of his rifle, and his voice barking orders with the fury of a man who refused to let death win. Then suddenly he was there, crouched beside me. I remember the blur of his face through my failing vision, the sweat and blood streaking down, his eyes wild but focused. "You're not dying here," he growled, his hand grabbing my vest, pulling me up with a strength that didn't seem human. Pain ripped through me as my wound tore wider and I screamed, but he didn't let go. The world around us exploded again. More gunfire, more rockets slamming into buildings, more men crying out. But in that moment, all I knew was the iron grip of Joe's hands and the raw power of his will. He dragged me across the street, bullets snapping past us like angry wasps, chunks of brick raining down as walls shattered. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how either of us weren't cut down. But somehow he pulled me behind a wall, shoved me into a corner and pressed a hand against my wound. "You hold on," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You're going home. You hear me? You're going home." Those words were like fire in my chest. I wanted to believe them, but every breath felt like my last. Still, I clung to them, clung to his certainty, because in that hell there was nothing else left to hold on to. And then he was gone again. Before I could even beg him to stay, he had grabbed his rifle and bolted back into the open. Through blurred eyes, I watched him move like a man possessed, charging straight at the enemy positions that had us pinned. He wasn't just fighting anymore, he was carrying all of us on his shoulders. I saw him throw grenades into bunkers, saw him storm through windows, his rifle barking with relentless fire. Each explosion shook the ground, each shout of his voice rallied what was left of our broken line. He was bleeding heavily, I could see it soaking through his fatigues, a dark stain spreading with every movement. But it only seemed to drive him harder. He was unstoppable, a force that refused to bend. One by one he silenced their guns. The AK fire began to sputter, the rockets came less frequently, and the pounding mortars grew distant. For the first time, the impossible thought crept into my mind. Maybe we would live through this. The men around me began to move again. Encouraged, they followed his lead, surging forward with renewed fury. It wasn't discipline that drove them now, it was him. It was Joe Ronnie Hooper, the man who had looked death in the eye and refused to flinch. His courage burned through our fear, lit something in us that the enemy couldn't smother. From where I lay, too weak to fight, I watched as my brothers rallied behind him. The battle that should have ended us instead turned into a storm we pushed back. The Viet Cong fought hard, but they hadn't counted on him. They hadn't counted on Joe Ronnie Hooper. Eventually the firing slowed. The screaming dulled. The smoke hung heavy in the air, carrying the smell of blood, fire, and destruction. And then, finally, silence. Broken, battered, and bleeding, we were still alive. I don't remember much after that. Medics came, voices shouted, hands lifted me onto a stretcher. My body felt weightless, numb, as if it no longer belonged to me. But through it all, one thought echoed over and over: I lived because of him. If Joe hadn't been there, if he hadn't pulled me from that street, if he hadn't fought with the fury of 10 men, I would have been just another name on a wall, another body lost in the mud of Vietnam. Instead, I am here decades later telling you this story. Joe Ronnie Hooper was more than a soldier. That day, to me, he was life itself. We had barely survived that wave, but there was no time to breathe. The enemy was regrouping, their gunfire flaring again from shattered buildings and hidden trenches. We were battered, half of us bleeding, and most of us too stunned to think clearly. In that moment, when retreat would have been the instinct of any sane man, Hooper did the opposite. He went forward. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even pause to check his own wounds, though I could see blood soaking through his fatigues, dripping down his arm. With a roar, he charged ahead, rifle raised, his voice carrying over the chaos. On your feet. Move forward. Keep the pressure on them. His commands were not suggestions. They were sparks, igniting the will of every man who heard them. I watched as he stormed into the open, bullets snapping past him, striking the ground at his feet, chewing the air around him. Most of us would have crawled, hugged cover, prayed for safety. Not Hooper. He rose taller, a defiant figure against the smoke and fire, daring the enemy to try and stop him. His rifle barked again and again, cutting down shapes that darted between the ruins. The bunkers that had pinned us earlier now became his targets. He hurled grenades with brutal precision, each blast silencing another nest of fire. His movements were relentless, forward, always forward, like a storm that refused to pass. I could hear his shouts above everything else: push left, cover that alley, keep firing. And somehow, though the battle should have broken us, We found ourselves obeying, our legs moving, our rifles firing because he willed it so. I tried to rise, clutching my rifle with what strength I had left, and even through the haze of pain I felt the pull of his presence. Hooper wasn't just fighting for his own survival, he was dragging us all with him, lifting us through the terror. One moment burns especially bright in my mind. A rocket-propelled grenade struck near his position, showering him with debris. I thought he was gone, crushed by the blast. But through the smoke, I saw him stumble forward, coughing, blood streaking his face, still moving, still fighting. He raised his rifle, sighted the enemy, and fired without hesitation, dropping 2 men who had thought they'd finished him. Get up, damn it. Don't you quit on me, he bellowed, his voice raw, tearing through the chaos. And we did. We got up, even those of us who thought we had nothing left. There was something in him that wouldn't allow surrender, something that demanded the same from all of us. I remember looking around and seeing men who had been crouched in fear now moving again, firing, advancing. It wasn't discipline that drove them, it was belief. Belief in Hooper, belief in the impossible strength of one man who simply refused to die. The enemy must have thought him possessed, a demon unleashed in the ruins. He tore through their defenses with savage force, bleeding but unyielding. And in that moment, when my own body felt like it was slipping into darkness, when death felt only inches away, I had one vision that seared itself into my soul. In that life or death moment, the only image I saw clearly was Joe Ronnie Hooper. The image of him charging forward burned itself into me, but the fight was far from over. The enemy had dug in deep, their defenses spread across alleys, rooftops, and shattered courtyards. Each time we thought we had silenced them, another burst of fire erupted from the ruins. It was chaos without end, and yet at the center of it always was Joe Ronnie Hooper. He didn't just give orders, he embodied them. When he shouted for us to advance, he was already 10 paces ahead. When he called for suppressive fire, his own rifle was already blazing. He was everywhere at once, a man who seemed larger than the battlefield itself. I saw him leap into a trench, his bayonet flashing as he drove back the enemy. I saw him climb into the wreck of a building, firing point blank into the shadows. He was relentless, a whirlwind of fury and courage that the Viet Cong could not seem to contain. What haunts me most is the blood. He was bleeding so heavily that I don't know how he remained on his feet. Each step left a dark trail on the ground, but still he fought, still he pressed forward. He was already carrying wounds that would have dropped another man cold, yet he acted as though his body belonged to something greater than himself. At one point I caught his eye. Just for a second, through the smoke and fire, he looked at me. And in that look there was no fear, no hesitation, only resolve. It was as if he was saying, if I fall, you must carry this on. But until then I will not stop. That glance was enough to push me back into the fight. I gritted my teeth, lifted my rifle, and forced myself up, following in his wake like so many others did that day. He was the fire that lit us, the anchor that held us steady in the storm. The enemy must have felt it too, because their fire grew desperate. They poured bullets at him as if every Viet Cong fighter understood that if they could stop him they could break us. But they couldn't. Again and again he rose through the smoke, dragging men to their feet, storming nests of fire, shouting until his voice was hoarse. By the time the sun dipped low, the street that had been our graveyard had become our victory. The bunkers were shattered, the alleys cleared, the enemy scattered. We were bloodied, broken, but alive, and the reason for that was Joe Ronnie Hooper. Even now, I cannot put into words how impossible it seemed at the time. By every measure, we should have been wiped out. The ambush was too fierce, the firepower too heavy. But Hooper refused to let death have us. He refused to let it take me. Years later, I've read the official accounts, the citations, the lists of medals. They tell of his heroism, his countless acts of bravery, his unmatched record. But none of those words, none of those decorations, capture what it meant to be there, to feel his hand pulling you from the dirt, to see him stand tall where no man should have survived. For me, it was never about medals or records. For me, it was the simple truth that I lived because he would not let me die. That day etched itself into my soul, and it will stay there until the day I draw my last breath. When I close my eyes, I don't see the enemy, I don't see the ruins. I see him striding forward through fire and blood, refusing to fall. Joe Ronnie Hooper, the man who became more than a soldier, more than a hero. He became the reason I am here. The battle had swallowed everything, and I lay there on the ground, half conscious, convinced my story was over. My body refused to move. My lungs burned with each shallow breath. The world blurred into smoke and fire, until all I could see was the broken street in front of me, littered with bodies. And then, through that haze of death, came the figure I will never forget, Joe Ronnie Hooper. At first I thought I was imagining him, a ghost conjured by a dying mind. But then I saw the way he moved, the fury in his steps, the defiance in his posture. He wasn't a ghost. He was more real than anything in that hellscape. He ran toward me while bullets snapped around him, ricocheting off stone, tearing through the dust. He didn't flinch. He didn't slow down. His eyes were fixed on me, like he had decided that I would not be left behind, no matter what it cost him. I tried to lift my arm to reach out, but it barely moved. My strength was gone. All I could do was watch as he closed the distance, his uniform dark with blood, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. And then his hand seized me. I will never forget the feeling of that grip, iron and fire all at once. His fingers dug into my vest, and with a grunt he pulled me up from the ground. Pain exploded in my side as the wound tore wider, and I cried out, but he didn't stop. He yanked me forward, dragging me across the dirt, his boots pounding against the shattered earth. Around us the battlefield roared. Mortars thudded, rifles cracked, grenades burst, but all of it felt distant compared to the raw power of his hand on me. That grip was life itself. In that moment I knew, if he let go I would die. But he did not let go. He dragged me yard by yard, pulling me behind the cover of a crumbled wall. Each second stretched into eternity. The air was thick with dust and smoke choking me, but through it all I could see his face, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a light that seemed unbreakable. He dropped down beside me, pressed a hand against my wound and barked, "Stay with me. You're not done yet. You're not dying here." His voice was fierce, like an order I couldn't disobey. The pain was blinding, but the sound of his words cut through it. I focused on them, repeated them in my mind like a prayer. "You're not dying here. You're not dying here." Even as my vision dimmed, I could feel him there, refusing to let me slip away. The last clear thing I remember from that moment is his eyes, steady, unyielding, filled with a fire that told me he would rather face hell itself than lose one of his men. And that is why when people ask me how I survived, I don't speak of luck or chance or fate. I speak of one man. He was the reason I lived. Hooper didn't just pull me out of the dirt, he fought every inch of the way to keep me alive. As he dragged me toward the cover of a shattered wall, enemy fire raked the street. Bullets chewed into the ground around us, dust spraying in our faces. He shifted his body, taking the brunt of it, and with his free hand he fired bursts from his rifle, forcing the enemy to duck. I could barely keep my eyes open, but I still remember the way he balanced my weight on one shoulder, firing with the other, as though the thought of leaving me behind never crossed his mind. A mortar shell crashed nearby, throwing us both against the rubble. My ears rang, my vision spun, and for a moment I was certain that was the end. But Hooper hauled himself up, spat blood from his mouth, and bellowed to the others, "Cover me! Keep them off us!" His voice cut through the chaos like a blade, and instantly men answered, rifles hammering back at the enemy. He bent down and grabbed me again, his face streaked with sweat and blood, his breath ragged. "You're not dying here, damn it. Not today." Then, with a strength I still cannot understand, he heaved me up and staggered forward again. In the haze of half-consciousness, my mind slipped to home. I saw flashes of my mother's kitchen, the swing in my yard, the quiet evenings I once thought would last forever. For a heartbeat, I wanted to let go, to sink into that memory. But then I felt his grip again, digging into me, hot and unyielding. The weight of his will pulled me back into the fire, back into the unbearable pain of the moment, but also back into life. Another burst of gunfire cracked overhead. Hooper dropped to one knee, covering my body with his, returning fire with calm precision. He didn't look like a man fighting for his own survival. He looked like a man refusing to surrender mine. Finally, with the help of 2 other soldiers who had answered his call, he got me behind a barricade of sandbags. My body collapsed, but Hooper stayed crouched beside me, pressing down on my wound with both hands, his face set like stone. He kept glancing toward the fight, shouting orders, firing when needed, then returning his hands to me as though holding me in place by sheer will. The last thing I remember before darkness closed in was his voice, low but fierce, "You'll make it. I swear you'll make it." And he was right. Because of him, I did. When I think back now, I know the truth of it plain and clear. If not for Joe Ronnie Hooper, my name would have been carved into a black wall with thousands of others, just another boy who never came home. He didn't just save me. He refused to let me die. When the guns finally quieted, the silence felt almost unreal. After hours of thunder, the sudden absence of sound was heavier than the battle itself. Smoke still hung in the air, drifting over shattered buildings and torn earth. The street was littered with shell casings, blood, and the still bodies of men who had fought their last fight. I remember lying there, bandaged by the medics, still too weak to move, staring at the sky as it turned from smoke gray to the faint purple of evening. My ears still rang and every breath tasted of dust and iron. But through the blur of exhaustion and pain, one figure stood clear: Joe Ronnie Hooper. He was still on his feet, though he had no right to be. His uniform was soaked in blood, his movements stiff and slow. Medics kept trying to get him to sit down to treat his wounds, but he shoved them away. He was too busy moving from man to man, checking who was alive, who could be carried, who still needed help. I watched him kneel beside a young private, press a canteen to the boy's lips, whisper something I couldn't hear. Then he staggered on to the next man. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried us through. There was no triumph in him, no celebration. Just duty. Just the unbreakable will that said, if one of us breathes, I will not rest. At one point our eyes met. He walked over, crouched down beside me, and for a moment the roar of battle seemed far away. "You made it," he said, his voice hoarse. I tried to answer, but all I managed was a nod. He gave a tired half-smile, the kind that carried more weight than words, and squeezed my shoulder before moving on. That touch, firm, reassuring, meant more than anything. He didn't linger, didn't make speeches. He simply did what needed to be done, then moved on to save the next man. Around us, the aftermath was brutal. Men cried for friends who would never rise. Some sat staring blankly, unable to process what they had survived. Others searched the wreckage for weapons, supplies, anything to make sense of the destruction. The air carried the sharp smell of smoke and death, and it clung to everything. But even in that wasteland, Hooper was the center. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a force that refused to stop moving. And for me, still alive because of him, that image became burned into my memory. I didn't see a soldier that day. I saw something more, a man who carried the weight of all of us, even as his own body crumbled. And in that broken silence, I understood the truth. I would never be able to repay him. That night, after the battlefield quieted and the medics did what they could, we gathered in what was left of a building. The walls were cracked, the roof gone, but it was shelter from the open sky. Some of us lay on stretchers, some sat hunched with blank stares, others whispered prayers into the darkness. I was half sitting against a wall, my bandages already soaked through. The pain was unbearable, but my mind refused to let go of one thing: the sight of Hooper moving among us. He didn't rest. He didn't even sit down. While others tried to close their eyes for a moment of peace, he paced. He checked rifles, redistributed ammo, made sure every man had water. He knelt by the wounded, adjusted bandages, whispered encouragement. Even broken and bleeding himself, he became the heartbeat of the room. At one point, someone asked him why he wouldn't stop, why he wouldn't at least let the medics take care of him. I'll never forget his answer. He just said, quietly but firmly, because they need me more than I need myself. Those words sank into me deeper than any bullet ever could. I remember drifting in and out of sleep, and every time my eyes opened, I saw him still there. Sometimes sitting with his back against the wall, rifle across his knees, eyes alert even through exhaustion. Sometimes crouched beside a man, whispering so softly I couldn't hear the words. But always there. Always present. To the outside world, people might read the reports and see only numbers, casualties, weapons seized, ground taken. But for those of us who lived it, what mattered wasn't numbers. It was that one man refused to let us be abandoned. When dawn finally broke, the light spilling through the ruined walls, I felt something shift inside me. I knew I had crossed a threshold. I had faced death, stared into it, and survived, but not because of my own strength. Because of him. And that realization has never left me. Through the years, through the long nights when the memories claw back, I return to that moment. I remember his bloodied hands on my chest, his voice telling me to hold on, his eyes refusing to let me slip away. That day in Vietnam didn't just save my body. It shaped my soul. It gave me a reason to carry on, to live in a way that honored the man who carried me out of hell. I will never forget the wreckage, the smoke, the cries of the wounded. But more than anything, I will never forget him. Moving among us long after he should have fallen, refusing to surrender, refusing to rest. If you ask me what the war gave me, I will not speak of medals or scars or nightmares. I will tell you this: it gave me the hand of Joe Ronnie Hooper, and the life that hand refused to let go. Time has passed and the war is now history to most. But for me, it is never just history. It is memory. It is breath. It is the reason I wake up each morning knowing my life was bought with another man's courage. I have told you about the battle, about the blood, about the fire. But when everything else fades, the noise, the chaos, the endless night, there is one truth that never leaves me. Joe Ronnie Hooper saved me. He was not just a soldier who fought bravely. He was not just a Medal of Honor recipient whose name would be carved into the annals of American valor. To me, he was something far greater. He was the reason I lived, the reason my family still had a son, a brother, a husband, a father. He was not only a hero of America. To me, he was the savior of my entire life. I sometimes wonder if he ever truly knew the weight of what he gave me. Did he understand that his choice in that instant, running through fire, grabbing me from death, echoed far beyond that battlefield? Did he know that because of him, birthdays were celebrated, children were raised, and generations would exist that otherwise never would? That is the measure of a man. Not the medals on his chest, but the lives he touched, the souls he carried when they could not carry themselves. To the younger generation, to those who never knew the crack of gunfire in the streets of Hue, I say this: remember him. Remember men like Hooper, who gave every ounce of themselves not for glory, not for reward, but for the brother beside them. We live in a world built on sacrifices we may never fully see. Do not let their memory be forgotten. Do not let the dust of time bury their names. Carry them with you, speak of them, honor them. For when we remember, they do not truly die. As for me, I will carry him until my last breath. His voice, his eyes, his hand pulling me from the dirt, they live in me, etched deeper than any scar. And when my time comes, when I finally close my eyes for the last time, I know the image that will greet me. It will not be the terror, not the chaos, not the darkness. It will be him reaching out once more the way he did all those years ago. And if there is a life beyond this one, if souls find each other again across the ages, I know what I will ask for. If there is another life, I wish only for one thing, that I might once more be the brother in arms of Joe Ronnie Hooper,